Welcome to the Profitable Farmer Podcast, where it's all about increasing the profitability of your farm by working smarter, not harder.
G'day and welcome to Profitable Farmer 2020. Happy New Year. Wonderful to have you joining us. This podcast is a really important one. 2020 has started in a way that perhaps none of us predicted or hoped for, with extreme and adverse fire events across much of this great country. To those affected, our thoughts and prayers are with you. To our clients and others, you have our support. And it's with that in mind that this podcast, we have asked Troy and Nette Fischer to join us. Troy and Nette farm at Wasleys, which is an hour north of Adelaide. They have a white Suffolk stud, and on the 25th of November 2015, they were completely wiped out by a fire event that saw them lose their property, all their farm infrastructure, their shedding, their white Suffolk entire ewe flock. They managed to retain some lambs, 1,000 lambs, and their home. Thankfully, their children and they were well and survived, but they, in this podcast, they share their quite incredible recovery effort. 4 years on, they find themselves strong and in a really good business position. Their recovery effort and the way they navigated the months and years that followed were exceptional. And so as motivation and inspiration for those of you who are directly affected, I introduce Troy and Nette to you. And to those of you who are looking to support people you love who have been fire affected, be it family, friends, or others in your community, this podcast will give you some wonderful tips and techniques and tactics as to how best to turn up in the short term and ongoing for those that are directly affected by the recent fires. So it's with that in mind that I introduce Nette and Troy Fischer to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good to be here.
How are you both? What's January and this new year, how's it playing out for you? And is there any real threat for you by way of fire in your area at this time?
So we are full speed ahead into breeding cycle. So rams in with ewes and getting ready for artificial breeding programs and embryo programs. We've had a number of really catastrophic fire danger days, but pleasingly nothing has happened on those days. So very anxious days for us, but it's so far so good in that regard.
It's been an amazing run of hot weather conditions and huge winds. It's been quite remarkable this year, hasn't it?
Yeah, sure has, yeah. But at this stage there's no problems here at all. So we're lucky.
I'm pleased to hear. And so to launch in, Troy and Nette, I guess what we wanted to cover with you was just to reflect on what happened for you back on November 25th, 2015, how that played out, and importantly then, what are some of the things that you did to recover? And then at the end, perhaps any lessons that you reflect on now on how to navigate the challenging times that will be ahead for so many people in our community. And then also, what can people do to support those families? So with that in mind, would you mind just sharing with us what happened on the 25th of November 2015 for you and your family?
Yeah, I'll kick off. So it was one of those catastrophic fire danger days, a day that you hope a fire doesn't start, and unfortunately one did. About 35 kilometres from us, started about noon. I checked all the waters of our sheep that morning and just got back in the house. By 1 o'clock, I was in the house with my daughter, 5-year-old daughter, and we smelled smoke. That was our first warning that there was a fire approaching. Went outside and saw a monster smoke plume, not quite as big as the one on your screen, but something very similar, barreling towards us. And so I had to make a very swift decision, and that decision was to leave. So I grabbed the laptops, a few important documents, the dog and my daughter, and we left within about 5 minutes. And then 10 or 12 minutes later, our place was on fire. The fire front had hit our place. Went straight through the whole farm, burnt every hectare. Pretty much our entire ewe flock were either burned or had to be destroyed as a result of injuries. I went to a safer place and met Nettie and the children, our other child who was at school. And then a couple of hours later, went back in after the front had passed and just started putting out spot fires and assessing the damage. We're blessed that our 2 houses were spared through the efforts of CFS and water bombers. So that's a real blessing. Our livestock losses were huge, and quite a bit of machinery loss, fencing, and vegetation, of course.
How much time did you have, Troy? You mentioned that it came on you incredibly quickly. How much time did you have to prepare for what happened?
Our house is in general quite well prepared in terms of fire defence, but I guess the lack of warning was what caught me out. I was getting text messages after I'd left that you need to leave now. There were some failings in the emergency warning system. Basically, I had 5 or 10 minutes to make a decision and do something very quickly. Otherwise, we would have had to shelter in the house.
It's quite incredible. And so you saved your home, but it burnt your entire farm, your farm infrastructure, and all of your livestock. Is that correct?
Almost correct. So 90% of our lambs survived the fire. They sheltered in a creek, which was a bit of a bare patch.
A dry creek.
Yeah, dry creek, and they were spared. So we had to destroy about 10% of them, but the majority of those survived. But other than that, our core breeding flock all got burnt, all our stud rams, etc. Yeah.
It's quite amazing. And in addition to this, Nettie, speaking with you recently, you shared that your second child had arrived to you in the weeks leading up to this event. Would you mind just sharing what else was going on for you at this time?
Yeah, sure, Jeremy. Actually, a third daughter, but that's fine. Which in some ways prepared us, you won't believe it, but it prepared us really well for this event because 3.5, sort of 4 months earlier, we'd had a pretty massive upset in the family. And so because we'd come through that pretty well, not saying we felt invincible, but we just, we had great perspective on what's important in life. And, what's important in life is your family's health. That's number one. So, yeah, we had it was still pretty busy on the farm, but it was school holidays, so I took our oldest two daughters to Queensland with my mum. And I was 22 weeks pregnant with our third daughter then. And, yeah, while we were in Queensland, I accidentally went into labour and had a baby in Townsville. And because, she was ended up being born at 24 weeks, so she was 640 grams when she was born, so she could not fly. So we got stuck in Queensland for, almost 4 months. So we flew when she was stable enough and on the right level of low flow oxygen. Then we were able to fly her to the Adelaide Women's and Children's Hospital. So we were only home for a day and a half before the fire.
So you were in hospital in Adelaide when the fire arrived to you?
Yes.
Wow. And nursing and supporting a newborn, quite incredible.
Yeah. And I guess there's lots of other people that are being affected by fires now that, have other things going on in their lives that, they have to still manage. So, yeah, that was a biggie though.
Unbelievable. And your daughter now is 4 years old, obviously. And all's well for her?
Yeah, she's fine. She's got a terrible temper, but she's really quite normal. Yeah, doesn't have glasses, no hearing problems, no mental problems, no disability at all. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. So not that I recommend it, but having a baby in Queensland is pretty good. Yeah. In winter too. Nice and warm. Yep.
So what do you do when it happens now? So just reflecting back, Troy, what were your first steps early after the fire had gone through? How did you navigate that, and what were the things you did first, and then some of the key decisions you had to turn your mind to?
Well, the immediate, I'm assuming you mean on the day of. The immediate thing, there was just things burning all around the place. Trees next to the house on fire, a truck full of grain on fire. Basically just putting out things that would threaten the homes were probably the first priority, and spent pretty much all the first night doing that. Got up every hour and a half to just check around the block, around the house yard to see that nothing had flared up. The following 24 hours was really start to assess the damage, the stock, the impact on the stock, what to do with them. Pretty much the next morning, Nettie and I made a swift decision to, we decided that I'd be on dead stock and she'd be on livestock, if that makes sense. So Nettie rounded up anything that was, basically our lambs that survived the event, and they had to be assessed for burns and those sorts of things. Put on water, supplied something to eat, and I, with the help of some of the Adelaide University vets, set about the grisly task of putting down all the other sheep, like basically destroying them. And then a small army of mates arrived on that day and helped us dispose of them. In terms of ground zero, the worst part of the whole event, that was definitely it. Picking up all the dead stock and putting them in a hole was bloody horrible. And I know there's been a fair bit of that going on Kangaroo Island. It's without doubt the worst part of the whole scenario. And then beyond that, once you've sort of got over that awful hurdle, then it's really focusing, not immediately, but within a few weeks, focusing on the rebuild. So what are you going to do? What fences need replacing? How are we going to feed the sheep that we still have? start thinking about machines that need replacing. You really, once that immediate aftermath is over, you start to think about rebuilding and just how to go forward in that regard.
Thank you. So what advice would you have for someone who has been directly affected in this last week by the fires that are present? And given that you've been through this and you have real first-hand experience, what advice would you have for them right now?
You go.
Well, your phone just goes bananas. Like you got people that are concerned, want to know you're okay, and in between that, you've just got your phone is just going crazy with people wanting to help. And we just very early on, well, the night of after the fire passed, we decided to just accept all offers of help. Just get them to come here, and they'll either work out what to do, or we'll, they can help somehow. That was probably, I think, the right decision. Like, it was crazy. We had just people in our driveway, like just so many cars and utes, people just got in and helped. So number one would be just accept all offers of help, as long as it's safe to do so.
On reflection, that was a really strong decision. Overwhelmed by support, but that decision that you made to perhaps swallow pride even and just accept the support that is being extended to you, you'd suggest that of people affected at this time?
Yeah, I do. I think farmers are a pretty proud bunch, and don't like charity. They don't like being offered help unless you're at rock bottom. And I think it's fair to say, after events that have happened in the last few weeks, and similarly with us 4 years ago, we were at rock bottom and we needed some help, and that help really contributed to getting back on our feet faster. There were years of work to be done, and if people chip in and do a little bit here and there, those years shrink into a shorter time frame, and you're back on your feet much faster. So I would certainly encourage anyone, that might be feeling a bit proud or we don't need help, just accept it while it's there, because in 6 months' time it might not be there, but the cleanup and the rebuild still will be.
Yeah. And for those who are wanting to support someone who has been directly affected, what can they do? What are some of the things that you would suggest in the days that follow an incident like this, that other farmers in the area, or even people who are in town, or relatives from the city, how would you have them turn up? What are some of the things? There's the obvious, and then perhaps some of the less obvious things, Nettie, that you've reflected on with us. What are some of the things you would suggest people can do to be of real support at this time?
Yeah. So I guess there's skilled help, and then there's less skilled help. So, for example, other farmers coming, that's just amazing, because they can drive a front end loader and unload a truck with some hay, or feed out some hay, or fix a fence, or there's just so much of that can be done, and so that's obviously highly valuable. But if there's people that are not farmers, there's still heaps of help that can be offered. Definitely lots of domestic things. So, for example, offering to do a grocery shop for the family, bringing a meal. Definitely I would check first to make sure that we did actually get at the start overrun with food. Like, we literally had no room in our fridge. We had neighbours storing food for us. Like, it got a bit crazy, but later on it was really appreciated, having meals, and people dropped off snacks for the kids and things like that. So that was great. We had some my sister and her husband and some close friends from the Barossa replace the irrigation system in our garden, which we just would never have done because it wasn't important compared to keeping the sheep alive. So, but in hindsight, that was just wonderful because, yeah, we wouldn't have done that for a couple of years, and so our whole garden would have died. And yeah, so yeah, if you know how to, you know, basics about irrigation, that's handy. But I mean, there's also, it depends on what's happened on, you know, the particular farm, but even sweeping it, like everything gets really dirty, so you can just sweep out a shed, or if the family's got young children, take the kids to the movies or take them to a playground, or just offer to do babysitting. Or, I mean, even down the track, you can offer to look after someone's farm, to let them have a break, to go on a holiday. I mean, yeah, I've probably got an endless list, which we don't have time for.
No,
today,
I'd encourage you, if you've got other things that come to mind, Nettie, I'd love for you to continue to share those. I completely understand that something like prioritising replacing the irrigation system would be low on the priority of things that have to be done, but yet having someone do that in support of you, and that must have been really significant that your garden got to recover and repair, and that you got to enjoy that in those years that followed. Is that fair?
Yeah. It's good for your mental health too. So yeah. So I mean, I guess if someone's had a farm burnt, but their house isn't affected, I mean, someone has to mow the lawn, and or you know, people could arrive with, especially this time of year, because hopefully we're only a couple of months away from the break of the season. Planting some, like say, some fruit trees or some plants in the garden. If someone's lost their home, it's a whole different ball game. But then things like, a good friend of mine, I'll just read out a couple of things that she found really helpful. They were donated a huge amount of stuff, and that actually wasn't. They had 22 bags of clothes, and when they went through them, there were 3 items of clothing that fitted them. So you got to, that's a personal thing. And yeah, the funniest one was she was given a leopard print G-string leotard, which is not helpful. You really don't want that if you've been burnt out. So
yeah, you can't use that as a fan belt, can you?
Yeah, it's like, well, that's someone else has already worn it. That's just wrong. So be conscious of what you do give them. But if your house is burnt down, you need, like, buy nice linen or nice clothes if you know that their size. Books. What else is there? Yeah. Other advice, I suppose, is to stagger the help. So immediately after, there's a huge requirement for help. But months after, you're still, you're still busy. So if you have a friend and you want to help them, but you just can't get there now, even if you go in 2 months' time, that might even be better and would be, really well received. So yeah.
That's there's so many fantastic ideas in there that I think are of real value to those who are wanting to extend their support to friends and loved ones, but are just exploring how to do that from afar, or how to do that later, and how to turn up now. So thank you for that. Some really good ideas. Just on the leopard skin leotard or undies or whatever that was, what are some other things that, even though people were coming from just the kindness of their heart, what are some other things that didn't land and probably weren't the best forms of support at the time? Were there others that I think it's going to be really useful for our listeners to also understand what not to do at this time?
One thing I'd chip in is lots of people reach out to the person affected and say, let me know what I can do to help. And whilst that is with the best intention, what that does is it creates a job for the person that's been burnt out. And invariably they've got 1,001 things running through their head, and the last thing they want to think about is something that person can do to actually help. So I guess what I would say is don't necessarily ask, just show up. Show up at some point, whether it's the days and weeks after, or like Nettie said, whether it's 3 months later. Just show up and do something, and it will be well received. Yeah.
Maybe send a text before you come.
Oh, of course, but don't wait to be told here's exactly how you can help me.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I like the way you framed that. It just adds another task to you rather than so just do something. And based on some of those ideas perhaps that Nettie just shared, either immediately or in time. I know when we lose a loved one, that often there's an overwhelming amount of support in the days and weeks that follow, but the months and 6 months, 9 months, 12 months later, often we move on with our lives. Maybe that's the time to delay your contribution and to, as you say, Nettie, to turn up a little later, so that the support is spread out and ongoing.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, everybody's different. Everyone has a different situation. If you have livestock, it's very different to if you're purely cropping, for example. So your needs are different, I suppose. Likewise, if you've lost your home, your needs are very different to if you haven't lost your home. Yeah.
So the recovery effort and your rebuild, how long do you reflect that took you both? And no doubt you worked just so incredibly hard in those years that followed. My question is, how long did the rebuild take, and how did it unfold for you?
I reckon we had 80 to 90% of things replaced, the rebuilt within 2 years.
Okay.
In terms of how it unfolded, I guess there's a few layers there. One is the sheep side of things. So, we went into Christmas with 0 breeding ewes. I think it was by March, we had about 700 stud ewes pregnant, and we dropped 1,000 stud lambs that year, like in 2016. So that rolls off the tongue really well, but there's a whole heap of work that went in to make that actually happen. But yeah, we were quite determined to not let this event send us backwards. We dug our heels in and set some clear goals from within a week of this happening. We'd worked out that we're going to rebuild and at what sort of scale and in what sort of time frame, and then we just head down, bum up, and made that happen. Probably another layer is infrastructure. So fencing was a big one for us. Basically, we procured all these sheep. They were located at I think 10 properties across Australia. And we had no fences, no pasture. They had nowhere to run. So we got a lot of help from Blazo, who are a terrific bunch. They helped rebuild a large proportion of our fences, replace gates, all that sort of thing. And they even helped us knock up a feed yard in 3 or 4 days, which was pivotal in bringing the sheep home because following that event, the season didn't break until late May, and so we didn't have grass until the end of June. So the place was brown, and we had to run these pregnant ewes somewhere, and so a feed yard is a perfect solution for that. So certainly for anyone with sheep, that's a key. If you don't already have one, that's a key bit of infrastructure that will help you go forwards. What do I miss?
So putting that into place, that confinement feed yard, was one of the first things that took place?
No.
Should have been.
We basically had a deadline in which the sheep had to come home, which was sort of early April, late March, early April. And I think a week before the first load were due to come home on the truck that you see in that photo, we were putting the finishing touches on the feed yard. So it was more a matter of, we really need this. We can't bring their sheep home until this is ready, so we just got to make it happen. So not everything happened in a perfectly logical, rational order, but they did happen in the right time frame still.
So, Troy, you were Ashmore is a white Suffolk stud, and you lost all your core breeding ewes. How did you manage that lambing percentage and lambing numbers so quickly? Did you buy in replacement ewes? Was that the tactic there?
Again, there's a few layers to that story. So you can't just click your fingers and find 500 or 600 stud ewes at that time of year of any quality. And so a range of things took place. So we purchased scanned in lamb ewes from other studs. We purchased empty ewes from other studs. One stud loaned us a truckload of about 100 ewes. Other studs joined ewes and gave them to us. A huge range of options, and they all added up to the sum total. Probably the most impressive part of that whole story was I contacted 6 of the top studs across Australia and just explained that we didn't want to start with people's culls. We were pretty keen to breed some great sheep from the get-go, and I just flat out asked them whether they would contribute some of their elite females to an embryo program. And overall, they all said yes, all 6. And so we drove around Australia and picked up 20. It was a total of 20 ewes. They went to the AI Centre for a couple of months, and we flushed 300 embryos out of them. So within the first year, we had some of the best lambs in Australia, and that's thanks to the generosity of these breeders. They'd seen what had happened and they wanted to help us out. So
was that response from them? Was that response from them somewhat overwhelming, Troy? That they would share that genetics with you so openly?
It was very humbling, I'll be honest. Sheep breeding is an interesting community where, in a way, we're all competitors, but we're all work together as well. So it probably reflects the relationship that we have with each of them. We've known all of these breeders for 20, 25 years. So that certainly helped. Having a long-standing, strong relationship with them helped. But your top elite females are like the goose that can lay the golden egg, and they all contributed those geese, so to speak, to us, which was very humbling and terrific.
It's amazing to hear that you were able to rebuild and recover from that stock loss just so quickly. Nettie, do you have anything to add here?
I guess just when the fire happened and we thought, well, number one, we just said, are we going to rebuild? And we just said, yes, we definitely are. And so that was decision number one. And then I guess in the back of our minds, we're thinking, oh, gosh, everyone's going to think that, we're no good anymore, and I don't want to buy sheep from Ashmore, rams from Ashmore, because, And we were worried about that perception. And then one night we went to a local pub, and there was a stock agent in there who had been drinking a fair bit, also affected by the fire. And he said to us, gee, that's going to set you back 10 years. And that was like red rag to a bull. Like, we were just like, he confirmed that what we were worried about, and we just said, well, we are just not going to let that happen. And we needed to, I guess, tell people that it wasn't happening and that we're business as usual. We're still, we didn't want to lose our clients that we'd worked so hard to build up over the years. So that is why we, the newspaper, the local paper or ABC Landline, when they rang us, we said we didn't actually really feel like doing any media, but we said yes because we wanted to get the story out that we were okay and that, our business is going to continue.
Which is such a credit to you. It may well have been probably the last thing that you felt like doing, but so important to get that message out so that you could solve that problem and reduce the risk of potentially losing clients.
Yeah, you did us a favour. It was good.
Amazing. And so then what are some of the challenges that played out for you thereafter? You mentioned dust as one and having extremely vulnerable soil types, and was that a huge problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was a map of the fire scar, and it was about 86,000 hectares, totally bare, exposed for about 6 months. And so it's a very vulnerable sort of landscape to wind erosion. And some of the soils in that area are quite sandy, so they're quite prone to drift, but even pretty much all soil types began to drift within days of the fire happening. And so our attention, there were local workshops on what to do, and our attention turned to what to do about that. And it appeared some form of remedial cultivation was the answer, basically trying to bring up clods or crumbs of soil to the surface to hold any loose soil in place when the wind blew. And so essentially an interesting thing unfolded. So most farms sort of run on guidance these days on GPS, so everything's in a straight line. And so our neighbours, one of the first out cultivating, and they cultivated their paddock just via the AB line, as you logically would think. Yep. And my dad, to his credit, said, "Oh, you watch that paddock. If the wind blows along those rows, it's going to drift." And sure enough, within 3 days of them cultivating it, we were getting their soil into our paddock. And so Dad said, "We're not going to do that. We're going to trial a method of going in a coil pattern rather than up and back." And so we did our most vulnerable patch first, and you can see in the picture what that looks like. And essentially the concept there is no matter which way the wind blows, there's a physical barrier at ground level to stop the soil drifting. And sure enough, the technique worked, and so we did another paddock and another paddock, and eventually we did the whole farm. It took a few weeks to sort of get over it all. And looked quite spectacular from the air. I hope to never see that sort of vision again, but as a method, it definitely worked.
It's quite incredible, and so much initiative shown here to come up with that. Is that technique? Where did that come from?
Well, my dad sort of cited his father, my grandfather, using a similar method in the 40s during a bad drought when soil erosion was a problem then. So they did a very similar thing, only with a horse and plough in that sort of shape. And he obviously remembered that as a kid and said, let's give that a try. And we did, and it worked. Everyone thought we were mad, but sometimes it pays to be different, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite amazing. So what other things did you have to look out for as part of that rebuild? Perhaps weeks and months down the track as the season unfolded, were there other issues like that you had to navigate perhaps for the first time?
Oh, probably machinery loss was the next biggie. We had a machinery shed, or a few machinery sheds burn with everything in it. So our ability to sow the crops, we were, in a bit of an awkward position. And we didn't have a decent front end loader. So, I guess our advice there is don't rush to replace machinery, because you need to buy the right kind. But having said that, if you haven't got a decent front end loader, you've got to get one straight away. Like you can't, you've got to be able to unload trucks. You've got to have at least that. But you've got to buy the right one. There was some machinery that burnt that Troy and I were we weren't that upset about. We had to be very careful. Troy's dad, loved those machines, but we were pretty happy to see them gone. So, but it was a big job to replace them, especially if you're buying secondhand. If you're looking in, if you're shopping if your budget's in the secondhand market, you've got to. It just takes ages to find it all. Yeah, it's a big job.
Probably another one, Jeremy, was we talked about the confinement feed yard, and we received a lot of donated hay, which was amazing. And the confinement feed yard helped us. Like we obviously fed all of that hay in the feed yard, which was a sort of a risk mitigation tactic, in that we don't know what weed seeds are in this hay. We don't know what's in it. So we basically contained, everything foreign of that nature in a 1 hectare block on our place, rather than introducing foreign weed seeds that we never had and don't want across the whole farm. So that's
a really important point, Troy, because to your point, you don't quite know what's coming onto your property. So being able to confine it to one location is a great comment. Thank you. Perfect. And so I guess for those watching this, we've got some then and now photos that I'll just flick through. How quickly did the season correct, and did the recovery of revegetation areas and pastures take? And how did that play out naturally for you?
Well, 2016, after a really dry start, turned out to be one of the wettest years on record. We're 400 with rainfall, and we cracked 600 that year. So once it did rain, it was a belter of a season, really. And that certainly would have helped. A lot of the trees that were burnt out reshot from the stumps, and we certainly made sure they were protected. Like, we use our scrubs as shade, but they've been protected for about 4 years now, and are coming back really well. There's trees a couple of metres high, and they're regenerating quite nicely. So if you had to dial up the sort of year to have after a fire event, a nice wet one is a good way to go, but obviously that's out of our control.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Looking back on the last 4 years, but perhaps the 2-year intense recovery effort, what did you do to stay positive and look after yourselves? And for those that have that now in front of them, what advice would you have for them about just how to look after themselves in the next few weeks and then thereafter? Nettie, do you have a comment there?
Yeah, I guess you've got to be really tolerant of each other. Each family member is probably going to lose it at some stage, or have a short temper, or say something that you don't agree with, or so you just be really tolerant. I mean, our family unit, we're all fairly I guess moderate people, and not super not pushovers, but we're not super strong, sort of pushy personality. So I think that's probably lucky. So yeah, I guess you do need to be tolerant. You have to be really tolerant of the different generations. So the way Troy and I responded was very different to Troy's parents. We just wanted to hook in and get it done and rebuild and work, and that was slightly different to how we processed it in a sort of a different speed, I suppose. I think I'm saying this in the wrong order actually, but number one would be to look after the family unit, and especially if you've got children of any age. The kids came first, so at no point, like our youngest daughter, once she left hospital, she had a huge amount of medical appointments, and that was number one. There were so many other things I could have been doing, but I just never missed a doctor's appointment. That was priority number one. So, and that should continue to be for people. So, just be a bit patient, I suppose, with each other. One thing that we didn't do that I regret is we should have had a good holiday sooner. We didn't give ourselves a break, and we were buggered for a while, and if we had shouted ourselves a really good holiday sooner, I think that would have helped.
I think it's such an important point. Troy, do you agree with that on reflection?
I do, yeah. When you're in that sort of super busy zone, you just constantly think about the next day and the next step and what are we going to do next. And you're sort of just pushing through the exhaustion a bit. But what might have been better is just down tools for a week or two and just have a break. The work's still going to be there when you get back, and you come back fresher and energised and maybe more effective. So we didn't do that, but I would encourage people to consider that for sure.
Thank you. And Nettie, you mentioned that maybe one way that other farmers can support is to offer to look after your property while you achieve that break. Probably a really useful thought to put in the minds of some people who are looking at how they can be of help long term. So that's a great insight. Thank you.
All right.
So, lessons learned, Troy and Nettie, you've put a few here that I'm just going to put up on our PowerPoint, but would you mind speaking to these? Having had this experience and to now be 4 years plus on from it, I feel like these lessons are going to be really valuable to those that are directly affected, and again for those that are seeking to support. So would you mind, Nettie, perhaps speaking to these?
Sure, yeah. I guess our farm was basically a clean slate. We had to fix pretty much every fence and every gateway and lots of water troughs and things like that. So it is good to look at that clean slate and just before you barrel in and just replace it exactly the same way it was. It is an opportunity to improve. and you've got to look at it that way. It's this, for example, the house that we're in was designed in the 1920s when horse and cart were used. So, and now we have B doubles coming. So it is an opportunity to look at things in a different way. And especially for machinery also, is that spray cart that you have the right one? Should you replace it? Should you replace your seeder with exactly what you had before? Those sort of things. So, and also you can get professional advice to help you with that decision, or just to give you some other ideas. We did do that. So, and definitely, when, once in a week or so, once things have set, when things are not burning anymore, definitely just set some goals, work out who's going to do what, and just give yourself an appropriate time frame. So don't expect to do it all in the first month. And I guess insurance is critical, so you do need to be really careful. Everybody will have there'll be different insurance assessors, and they'll operate in different ways. This doesn't seem to really be a set template for how you do your insurance claim. So I did ours in Microsoft Excel, because I know how to use it, but you just use a version that works for you. And it's important that everyone's involved in at least having a look at the insurance claim before you send it in, to make sure that you've got everything on there. And it's less critical if you're grossly underinsured, because as long as you can demonstrate that you've reached your limit in each of the areas. But if you're really well insured, you do need to be really careful to make sure that you get everything. Because, there was things that we found 6 months later, we went to use them, we were like, oh, that's burnt. We didn't, forgot about that tool or whatever. So, be really careful about your insurance and don't rush it.
So your comment there, don't rush it. How quickly do you think people should be moving on making that claim? Is it something that, what do you mean by don't rush, I guess, Nettie, is what I'm asking?
Well, I guess it's really personal. So it depends on your farm and what you've lost. If it's just fencing, that's something, but yeah.
Ours took about 12 months to finalise the full claim. So
wow.
It came in iterations, in stages, but just being very thorough and going through the fine detail maximises your claim, but takes time.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And more broadly, when you reflect back perhaps on the amount of support that you got, what are some of the lessons more broadly, and perhaps more from a personal and social perspective?
From a personal perspective, I guess my message maybe to the fellas would be to just look after their health. Eat well, don't drink too much, that sort of side of things. But for me personally, after the first 2 years, and we worked our butts off, and things were pretty good. We'd achieved a lot of stuff. We'd probably done 5 years working too, it felt like. And personally, I was not very happy. I should have been happy and wasn't. And as it turned out, I went to a doctor and got diagnosed sort of depression and anxiety, and got some medication, and pretty much ever since have been terrific. So that's not super easy to sort of share, but I guess that I have no doubt there's others out there that might be find themselves in a similar boat 1-2 years down the track, when things have returned to normal and they still should be feeling great and aren't, I definitely encourage them to get some help with that, look into that professionally.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Troy. And I understand completely that might be challenging for you to do. But I really am grateful that you have. And again, to our farmers listening, that we are proud people. I think it's one thing to accept the support that comes to you, but if you are struggling personally, in the coming weeks and months, I guess my request of you is that you're brave enough, as Troy was, to reach out and get that professional help just to aid you in navigating the road that's ahead. So, yeah, again, Troy, thank you so much for sharing your experience post your fire. Very much appreciated.
No worries. I mean, it's really about taking ownership of your health, including your mental health.
Yep, absolutely. And staying above the line, as we say, and staying completely responsible. And it is just so evident the degree to which in these real times of adversity that you both managed to achieve that. So well done. Nettie, what any other final reflections or lessons learned that you reflect on now?
I think we're pretty proud of ourselves for being able to get through it. Not that I think that we're bulletproof, but I think, we can get through anything because we did that. It brings the community closer. We're better mates with people in our area than we were before. The things that your friends do for you just blows your mind, and it just gives you a happy feeling. Like you're almost, it's a pretty amazing time, really. It's an awful time, but it's also an amazing time because your friends just blow you away with it. Friends and family blow you away with the kindness. And
just a springboard off that, I mean, you could predict some pretty dire outcomes for communities that have been through these sort of events. That farms will be sold, marriages will break up, all those sorts of things. Certainly in our district, we thought some of those things could happen. It's amazing, sort of almost the opposite has taken place in that the community sort of banded together, and we're probably closer as a community than we ever were. No one got divorced. No one sold up. So whilst it might feel like a really dark time right now, there is some light out at the other end, and it's amazing what sort of comes out of people in these sort of situations.
Just looking at the photos that you shared about how your property has recovered, and just to hear the degree to which you've been able to continue to grow your white Suffolk stud and your property, it's such an amazing example of that brightness of the future, or that light at the end of the tunnel. And so for those who are directly affected and those supporting, just lean on that you will get through this, you will recover, your community will be stronger for it. And as you said, Nettie, I think that it's an opportunity to change and to improve. And choosing that mindset and that approach to your recovery effort, I think it's just so important. So thanks again to you both. It's so insightful to hear just how you responded. I've heard it said, a mentor of mine talked about the fact that there is post-traumatic stress and there is also post-traumatic growth. But we don't often hear about the latter. We don't hear about post-traumatic growth. And that example of when a tree gets burned, how it throws up shoots and limbs from everywhere and just recovers exponentially compared to the trajectory that it was on is a really useful example, I think, at this time of post-traumatic growth. So growth can be exponential on the other side of a major trauma. And so I guess what I'm suggesting there, as Troy and Nettie have shared with us today, that to some degree you get to choose post-traumatic growth and exponential recovery, perhaps more than the alternative. And so, again, for those listening, just want to encourage you to do what you need to do to look after yourselves, and to choose post-traumatic growth perhaps than the alternative. So Troy and Nettie, just in finishing, to those that have been affected, what would you say to them in these days and weeks that follow, I guess, and the shock that they might be feeling right now and the challenge that they're navigating? What sort of final comment would you have for, I guess, those members of our community directly affected?
I'd just say, as best you can, look after yourself and look after those around you, your family and friends. And I'd just say that it feels like a very dark time at the moment, potentially, and you might be feeling, how are we going to get through this? But if you can focus on some things into the future, set some goals, things will get better, things will improve, and like Jeremy said, you might actually find exponential growth. You might actually find that your property is better and improved as a result of the things that you do post recovery. So that's probably me. Thank you, Troy. And Nettie, from you?
We'll echo Troy's comments really, but yeah, family's number one. You've really got to keep that as your number one priority over everything else. And a farm is still a business, so you need to make really careful, calculated decisions about your business. So don't, especially once you've got your insurance money, be really, really careful about how you spend that, and spend that in the wisest possible way. Insurance payouts, it's seen as taxable income. So you're allowed to average that over 5 years, but it is, I don't agree with it. It shouldn't be taxable income really, but you do need to definitely involve your accountant and definitely get professional advice on if you need to rebuild your farm, just to get some other ideas. But yeah, going back to it, family's number one.
Thank you, Nettie. Wonderful comments. Again, I guess reflecting on our conversation, I guess the other key insight for me is just to remind people to embrace the support that will come your way, and to be open to letting that in, and then if needed to seek the support proactively that you need, so that you can navigate what's ahead with resilience and with real strength. Troy and Nettie, thank you so much. I think at this time it is just so significant to hear your story and to understand your journey post November 2015. And I can only predict that those directly affected are just going to get so much value from hearing your recovery effort and the way in which you navigated that. And also those supporting people directly affected, there are some wonderful ideas in what you've shared as to how to turn up now and how to turn up ongoing in order to best support those families and friends that are in our community that have been affected by these recent fires. So to you both, again, I'm very grateful for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
A pleasure.
So thank you all for joining us. All the best now as you navigate 2020. Encourage you to take some time to reset and refocus as we launch into 2020. And let's hope for that significant rainfall event, Troy, that you mentioned as the perfect way in which to set up and recover from the fires that have transpired in recent times. Thank you, ladies and gents. Thank you again, Troy and Nettie, and all the best for January and for 2020, and bye for now.